Hello, everybody. I am Drew Duncan, and this is the Sync 57 Sports Show. Plenty to get to. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the Nets. Whew. How's that prediction working out for Stephen A. Smith? Man alive. We're going to be talking about KU taking on Duke. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the college football playoff. And, of course, in addition, we're going to be talking about the early game in the part of the Classic tonight, Michigan State and their bounce back, I guess you could call it, win this time. Boy, back-to-back tough games for Michigan State. Obviously starting out with the Zags and then moving on to Kentucky. Hell of a schedule, which, by the way, Kentucky and Michigan State share a common opponent in Gonzaga, who Kentucky, I believe, is going to be playing this Saturday. So we're going to be getting into all of that. Let's go ahead and start it off with the college football playoff. You know, nothing really surprised me. I don't think anything surprised anybody with the college football playoff. And I feel like this year more than ever, the committee just kind of, for the most part, seems to be ranking teams as the AP and the coaches poll ranks the teams, right? Just kind of seems like that's the direction that they're going. And right now it's obvious. You've got four undefeated teams, right? TCU, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia. They're in the top four. We all know that Michigan is still going to have to play Ohio State. I think the only thing that really bothered me was Reese Davis saying, look, I think a one-loss TCU right now is better than a one-loss Clemson because of Clemson's out-of-conference schedule. That's what he cited. To me, that blew my mind because I thought to myself, Tarkenton, that's who TCU played out of the conference. They played SMU, and they had a difficult time with that game. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, if we're going to be splitting these hairs, then we got to split these hairs the same way. All right. Opening game of the year for Clemson, I said from the outset that I didn't think that they were going to be a football team that could compete with anybody in the college football playoff, specifically Georgia's, who I cited, because of how they had a hard time with Georgia Tech. And I understand that it was the first game of the year, but I knew that Georgia Tech wasn't going to do anything special. They really shouldn't have beat Syracuse. They slid by on that one. From everything from bad play calling in that football game by Dino Babers to the bad call, obviously, towards the end of that football game when Schrader was clearly hit out of bounds. But besides that, Syracuse should have won the game handedly. I mean, they forced 4 turnovers in that football game, and the only time they scored on one of them was when the defense ran it back, right? So at the end of the day, I looked at the ACC, and I pointed out, I was like, Wake Forest isn't going to get it done. North Carolina, as glad as I am for Mac Brown. Texas, I think all of you have found out you could do a lot worse than him. Offensively, they're phenomenal. Defensively, they couldn't stop a Pee Wee League football team. I mean, seriously. And then I looked at Syracuse. I knew that our record was tainted. Me being a huge Syracuse fan, my favorite football team in college, I knew that the record was partly tainted. And they struggled against teams that they shouldn't have struggled against, Virginia, etc. And boy, the beatdown that they took against Notre Dame, just bad, right? And of course, Clemson a week later ended up being a victim. And right now for Ohio State, as I've stated many times, the more Notre Dame continues to bounce back and win, the better that game begins to look for Ohio State. So far, they're the only team that can say that that's beat Clemson. And then, of course, in addition to that, I think a lot of people believe that Syracuse was going to be able to bounce back, beat Notre Dame, and move on with their season. It's just not the case. And I didn't think that was going to happen, but a lot of people, I believe, did. You know, anybody who watches Game Day knows that people were picking Syracuse after a while every single week to get the job done, talking about that defense, which we all know is a championship caliber defense, but they don't have the ability on offense to win games that way. Then, of course, Schrader got hurt. The backup's been in. It's been a nightmare for Syracuse. The point of what I'm saying is that when you look at TCU and you look at Clemson, neither one of them have really been impressive. I've been calling TCU suspect from the beginning. I did state at the beginning of the season that I felt that in the Big 12, they had the best defense. But having the best defense in the Big 12 is about like having the best defense in the Big 12. Who are you going to stop outside of that? I still don't have any hope for anybody in the Pac-12. Said that from the beginning. It looks good for Georgia, obviously, because of the beatdown that they put on Oregon, that Oregon peeled off as many wins as they did. But there, again, we see them, they get beat. Now the reliancy becomes all 100% on USC, and even with one loss, unless something amazingly crazy happens, I just don't see a one-loss USC football team getting in even as a Pac-12 champion. I think that LSU, most people would regard them as a better football team. And again, these are things that I've talked about before. You know, if you want, I'll put the link in the bio. Some of the other times that I've covered a lot of this stuff, I just didn't understand Reese's mentality and point in saying Clemson's out-of-conference schedule was horrendous and that a one-loss TCU Big 12 champion would still get in over a one-loss Clemson ACC champion because of Clemson's schedule when it has literally been no better than TCU's, who, by the way, have really struggled to beat some very mediocre football teams. They had a very difficult time against a backup quarterback in KU when Bean came in. I mean, I understand Bean played great in that football game, but still, he's the backup quarterback. You had a very difficult time with other football teams. You've been having to play from behind the eight ball in a lot of games, and it's been in the second half where TCU has made their mark. But you're not going to be able to do that against Georgia, okay? You're not going to be able to do that against LSU. If anybody thinks that TCU can get down 28-10 at halftime the way that they did against Kansas State and come back and beat Georgia, then I have some property that is on a beachfront in Wisconsin that I would absolutely love to sell you. Because it's not going to happen. TCU has not really dominated anybody. Hard time against Oklahoma State. The only game that they dominated was OU, and it seemed impressive at the time. But from what we've seen with OU now and how they've struggled throughout the season, is it really that impressive of a win? Yes, I have said that Georgia has been doing what they're supposed to be doing for the most part, right? Their schedule's been fairly weak outside of, you could say, the Oregon game, inside of what they've had to do in the SEC. Florida is not that good. Tennessee's the best team that they've played so far. They beat them handily, okay? You look at them, they were blowing out teams that they were clearly superior than, right? So TCU's done that in how many instances this season? Really hard time with Texas. I just don't see TCU, even if they do get in, really being able to make a run. They would be best suited playing somebody like a Michigan that is a one-dimensional football team. They run the football and they play defense. They don't have enough quarterback play that if it's on the line, you can rely on their quarterback to get it done. It's not going to happen. You can load the box, kill the run game, and offensively, you're looking to make just enough plays so that way you can win that football game. Possibly create an interception, which would not be difficult, I don't think. And, you know, start inside the 30, the 20, etc. Make it easier on your offense, put up some points early, and win the game that way. I mean, clearly, you know, we saw that they can win a defensive game the way that they did against Texas, but to me, they should have run that game running away. In fact, they should be winning a lot of these games running away. And I don't want to hear about how tough the Big 12 is, because it's not. The Big 12 is so bad. It's so bad that they finally decided to allow Cincinnati to come to the Big 12. That's how bad it is. And I love Cincinnati. I love the underdogs. I felt that they were undefeated. They should have been given their shot in the CFP. Yes, they lost to Bama. Not going to get into it. But the point of what I'm saying is, to the Big 12 world, Cincinnati could have got in how many years ago? A Houston could have got in how many years ago? A BYU, etc. They said, no, we're too good for you. Now they don't think they are. They're so bad that OU may not even finish this season 500. They're so bad that Texas is 6-4. They're so bad that TCU had a difficult time with SMU. they're so bad that they couldn't beat what is basically a down year for an Alabama football team. Now, I know Texas had their backup quarterback in for a good majority of that football game. I get that. The point of what I'm saying is they still had a lot of chances to win that game, and they couldn't seal the deal. They're so bad that OU's been to how many college football playoff games and got annihilated. When was the last time we saw a Big 12 team win a national championship in football? I'll wait. Sure, they went 09, Texas, right? But they got beat by Bama. The last time they did it was Texas, and that was with Vince Young. Other than that, they've either been blown out of a BCS title game or they've been blown out of a playoff game. It didn't matter if it was Bob Stoops, Lincoln Riley, whatever. The result was the same. The competitive difference from the Big 12 to the SEC to even the ACC is so far and away different. It's not even funny. You can allude to Oklahoma State beating Stanford years ago in a BCS game, and it wasn't a title game, let's not forget that. But remember this, that was a very controversial football game. Very controversial. Okay, so the point of what I'm saying is, if anybody out there thinks that TCU could compete with Georgia, you're sadly mistaken. It's not going to happen. They might be able to go point for point with them, but defensively, the more I watch this football team, the more I wonder if they could stop anybody. Again, ask yourself, because we talked about it, right? LSU, people think that there's an SEC bias, specifically Joe Klatt. LSU just keeps winning football games. And again, I ran down the list. Do you think Clemson could beat LSU? Wake Forest, Syracuse. Do you think USC, Oregon, UCLA could beat an LSU? Do you think Texas, TCU, Oklahoma State, do you think that they could beat an LSU right now? You start going down the line, undefeated doesn't mean better. Sometimes it just means undefeated. So there's that. Obviously, not a lot of football left to be played, but there's enough football left to be played that things can be shaken up. We'll see how everything turns out. But to suggest to me that a one-loss TCU is better than a one-loss Clemson predicated upon the out-of-conference schedule, given what we've seen over the years, at least Clemson was able to compete with Bama. At least Clemson beat Bama. Come on. I just, it is what it is, I suppose. All right. Moving on. Duke and KU. Well, that was a hell of a game, wasn't it? Actually, both games that I watched tonight at the collegiate level were both really good basketball games for the most part. The old adage is you don't want to be the guy who follows the guy. You want to be the guy who followed the guy. Because the pressure is just insane. And right now for Duke, can you imagine trying to replace Coach K? I mean, it was so bizarre not seeing him on the sideline. Just so bizarre. But I will say this, John Shayer is in a very good situation. Now, I know that Duke lost tonight, okay? But he is in a very good situation. He's in a very good situation because he still has Jeremy Roach, who's left over from Krzyzewski's last great class, right? Then on top of that, he's been an assistant there for, 9 years? So not only are we looking at 9 years, but that means the players know who John Shayer is. And they also know him. Do you understand? Him. They know him. That's huge. So they're not being around somebody that's unfamiliar. And you've got the leadership with Roach on top of that. He's in a very good situation. Okay, it's not like Coach K left the thing in shambles. They went to a Final Four. It's not like Coach K was at the end of his rope, like what we're seeing with Jim Boeheim and Syracuse. It's not like we're seeing Duke suddenly struggle to win basketball games and just, be a horrible basketball team. Left him with a Final Four basketball team. So the recruiting, you just got to maintain. Now, easier said than done, but that's what he has to do. Now, conversely, as far as coaching goes, obviously, you've got KU in that whole situation, right? No Bill Self. And so another guy that's under a huge amount of pressure, Norm Roberts. And I don't think there was anybody who thought with an interim head coach, Self not being there, all the outside distractions, right? Because KU self-inflicted suspensions, self-inflicted, wounds and all that stuff that they're doing right now, hopefully to get the NCAA off of them from, the scandal that happened with the NCAA corruption and all the supposed payouts and all that stuff, right? The investigation started, 2017, 2018? Supposedly, athletes were getting $75,000 left in a duffel bag outside of a movie theater. Another guy supposedly got $150K, all this stuff going on. And supposedly, allegedly, all these things happen. And so what happens? Now there's no Bill Self for 4 games. How are the kids going to respond? How's Coach Norm Roberts going to respond? Well, they responded really damn good. Look, they out-hustled Duke tonight. That's all there is to it. They out-hustled them and they outplayed them. Double digits in the blocks margin for the KU Jayhawks. And mind you, 2 of them were on one possession and back-to-back blocks. Let's not forget, KU was basically dominating that game at one point. They were the superior team tonight. And you have to give credit to Coach Norm Roberts for keeping that team together and playing the style of ball that those kids are accustomed to playing, that they would have played under Bill Self. And I got to be honest with you, I thought they looked a little better. I really do. I felt like that team looked a little better with Norm Roberts. And if I'm being 100% honest with you, depending on how things go with how the NCAA handles this whole investigation, because mind you, they haven't given out their punishment yet. This is all self-inflicted stuff from the University of Kansas. One of 2 things could happen here. If they keep Bill Self on, I guarantee you, given what we just saw at KU right now, Norm Roberts, somebody out there is going to be blowing up his phone. Somebody's going to be sending a text. Somebody's going to be sending an email. Somebody's going to be calling him a fax, making a visit out there, whatever they got to do, man. Given what we saw tonight from the KU Jayhawks and how they never quit in that game, having in the right guys at the right time. I mean, you want to talk about a gut check feeling, having Dick Brady in there, or Grady Dick, pardon me. What do you have? 3 possessions in a row where he scored points? Then a crucial defensive play on top of that? And you would have thought he's got the hot hand, leave him in, but he didn't. He put in another group of guys, and they were able to get it done. Then, of course, Duke, just mismanaging the clock down the road. They had 1 timeout left, and they only had 3 fouls, so they had plenty of fouls to give. They could have stopped that clock numerous times with about 40, 50 seconds left. And for whatever reason, they just chose to let KU run down the clock. That I won't understand. And believe me when I tell you, that was a foul on Roach when he drove to the basket, with under 30 left to go in that game. That should have been an and 1 situation. I'm not going to disagree with that. But the clock management itself, that ultimately hurt Duke, I feel like, more than that call did down the stretch. I'm not saying that it wasn't game altering, because it definitely could have been, and it should have been called. Simultaneously, you've got to manage the clock better. And because they didn't handle their timeouts right, remember, KU had 2 timeouts left going into an under minute and a half in this game. Duke already only had 1. They got out-hustled, they got outplayed, and it was a total team effort by KU. And if I'm being really honest, they got out-coached. I know a lot of people will tell you basketball is a player's sport. I'm not going to deny that. What I am going to tell you is, after tonight, if KU keeps Bill Self, Norm Roberts next season head coach somewhere. That's all there is to it. If he's not, it'll be because he wants to stay in KU. Believe me when I tell you, that will be the case. All right. Michigan State and Kentucky. Whew. Man, being great is difficult. Staying on top is even harder. And I'm going to tell you right now, Kentucky still, even though they lost tonight, they still have probably the best player in the country, Oscar Tshiebwe. He is stocky. He is smooth. He is intelligent. The way that he hides himself behind other players and disguises what he's doing and sees what the offense is doing before they even do it, to set himself up defensively to make good blocks and put himself in a position to get rebounds. He is a true basketball player. That is all there is to it. Michigan State, as a team, out-rebounded Kentucky. But lest we forget, at one point, Michigan State as a team had 16 rebounds. Tshiebwe by himself for Kentucky had 10. Put that in perspective. In fact, out of the first 16 rebounds for Kentucky, Tshiebwe had 11 of them. Let that sink in. Michigan State had a really difficult task tonight. Back-to-back difficult games. Obviously, coming into the season unranked. They go and they play Gonzaga. They get up by double digits. They don't hang on to the lead. They end up losing the game. And now they're playing a Kentucky team that is going to have a common opponent in Gonzaga coming up this Saturday, if I remember correctly. Folks, these are style points right now for the NCAA tournament. All these games right now that are being played are bigger than what you may think. It's not just about college basketball and promoting big games and all those kinds of things. Sure, a lot of that goes into it. But as far as the NCAA tournament goes, these are huge. Michigan State is 1-1 in these games. And if Kentucky doesn't beat Gonzaga, it is going to really help Michigan State's cause when you think about it. Because they beat Kentucky, which means that they will have supposed to have been a better team than Kentucky. Kentucky supposedly was a better team going into the season than than at least Michigan State, not Gonzaga, according to the polls. But even then, Gonzaga wins that basketball game. It looks good. And really, even then, if Kentucky wins, it's a win-win. See, right now, Michigan State gets a win-win out of this. Because we all know what's going to happen. Nobody's going to compete with Gonzaga, and they're going to end up getting a high seed in the tournament. This is all there is to it. But it would be better for Gonzaga to beat Kentucky. Especially since, the SEC, as far as basketball goes, once in a while in Alabama or, a Tennessee or somebody like that will pop up. But in the end, Kentucky pretty much carries the load for SEC basketball, right? The same way that Alabama, for the most part, has done over the years for the SEC in football. That's what Kentucky does. And Kentucky, given their area, their depth. I mean, think about it like this. Sheboy had another double-double tonight. He didn't foul out until late into the first overtime. Came off the bench. At one point, he'd only played like 22 minutes. And I think that was with 11 or 12 left to go in the game. Come on. It's a win-win for Michigan State regardless. If both teams finish with great seasons, it is a win-win. Because it won't be a bad loss to Gonzaga even though they blew that lead. And it'll definitely be a great win over Kentucky. Which, to be honest with you, Kentucky should have won that game running away. At one point, they had forced 11 turnovers, 7 of them by one player. One player forced 7 turnovers. The thing was, is Kentucky just beat themselves, man. In transition, offensively and defensively, they weren't very good. Defensively, outside of Sheboy, there just wasn't any rotation. There wasn't any communication. There wasn't any of that stuff that was going on. And I just don't feel like they were ready for the screenplay and the rotation play that Michigan State had in place for that game. The other thing that you really got to think about is the 3-point shot, especially Hauser. At one point in that game, he was 4 out of 7. I think he led all Michigan State scores in points. You have to really realize that this was a game that Kentucky is going to look back on and say we should have won, and we probably should have won by 20. I think they forced 16 turnovers overall in the night. I mean, at the bare minimum, that should be 32 extra points. Hell, if you even score on 10 of those, that's an extra 20 points right there. They win the game running away. But they just didn't do it. And I know that there's probably going to be some talk about Sheboy and him going out for a little while with was it 8:45 or something like that? It was the right thing to do. He had 3 fouls. I really didn't think he was going to come back till there was about 5 minutes left to go in the game. But what was it, 7:45? They ended up putting him back in. Don't forget Soko from Michigan State. He had 4 fouls. It was a very pretty much evenly played game for the most part. But when you look at it as a whole, how did Kentucky lose this game? They were out-rebounded as a team. They were horrible in transition. I mean, that's how Michigan State, and back-to-back at the end of regular and then at the end of the first overtime, they were able to get easy dunks. We're not talking about fighting plays where they had to do something spectacular, make like a great clutch shot in the corner or something like that. We're talking about easy dunks where guys were just not in position, not communicating, not paying attention. Situational basketball. They didn't have it. To me, the only guy that did was Sheboy. I mean, he's such a leader. I mean, at one point, I saw him, he gets a rebound, kicks it out. And he said, man, shoot it. Dude put it up, got a 3. Sheboy is going to have to do a good majority of the work for this team, and is going to have to be the guy on the floor to get everybody in position. Because the rotation and the transition game was just not there. Kentucky, they rushed so many times. It was either a bad pass or just a shot that you just look and you go, why are you taking that shot? You've got the fast break. You created another turnover. If the play's not there, just slow it down, get into your half-court set, work the clock, and score. Situational basketball. Kentucky beat themselves tonight. There were some great individual efforts, but when all was said and done, they beat themselves in a game that they should have won by 20. They really should have. Sheboy, to me, still the best player in all college basketball. But he's going to have some competition a little bit later on. Obviously, we'll get into that, another story, another time. But for right now, Kentucky, they're going to be looking forward to Gonzaga. We'll see if they're able to bounce back or not. I think we're going to find out about Gonzaga early on in the season. I'm more impressed with Kentucky still, though. If they could just clean up a few things, the transition game, some of the rotation on defense, they'll be one of the better basketball teams in the whole country. Michigan State just outcoached Calipari just a little bit. And they did just enough to win that basketball game. I mean, I think by the end, the second overtime, you just saw a tired Kentucky basketball team. And mind you, like I said, Shibwe, he got fouled out with, 30 seconds left at the end of the first OT. So that obviously played a role going into the second one. He came off the bench. Player of the Wooden Award winner from a season ago, coming off the bench. Boy. And playing the way that he did. Unbelievable. But, like Calipari says, we don't rebuild, reload. I think he feels like he's got 10 guys that could start at any given moment. So that is what it is. All right. Finally, Brooklyn. Don't talk to me about what's going on with the Sacramento Kings. I'm not going to take anything away from them. Come on, man. Brooklyn is just so bad right now. The Nets are just bad. They're just a bad basketball team. And Stephen A., I give the man credit. He stands by his prediction. And it's early enough in the season where if he doesn't want to back down from it, I respect him for it. I'll tell you that much. And, I'm not really a Stephen A. fan. But, I respect the guy because he's just like, you know what, bro? I'm going to stick to my guns here. But, man, they are bad. Everything about that team right now is just wrong. There's nothing good. What good can you say about the Brooklyn Nets? You got Kyrie's nonsense. You just... firing coaches, blaming this is a team full of coach killers right now. And I love KD. He is a hell of a basketball player. But this is a team that is not a team. It is a bunch of individuals who are all in it for themselves. And that includes Ben Simmons. Come on, man. The guy's dating he dated a Jenner/Kardashian. What does that tell you? Anybody who doesn't know better by now, bro, I don't know what to tell you, man. Seriously. Boy, it's a bad day in Brooklyn. I had such high hopes for that team. And the funny thing about it is they were so good. They were so good. If KD just wore the damn correct shoe size, we're probably having a different conversation right now. Maybe we're calling it a fluke. I don't know. If only he had just worn the correct shoe size. Unreal, man. Unreal. It's done. It's time to break up the band. It's time for Brooklyn to call no and joy and just move on. Just move on, bro. All right. I am Drew Duncan. Quick recap. Sync 57, the sports show, where wherever you listen to the podcasts, iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, et cetera, over there. To say that TCU is a one-loss football team would get in over a one-loss Clemson simply because of their record from the out-of-conference in terms of the teams that Clemson played. That big win over Tarkenton, let me tell you what. Come on, man. Seriously. That should be a come on, man. Man, if I worked there. Come on, man. Kentucky beat themselves. Hundreds of chances to put the game away. Could not do it. Just could not do it. Forced so many turnovers. Should have won that game in a landslide. Didn't happen. However, they still have the best basketball player in the country, Shibwe. I don't know what Calipari's thinking, but if that's me, that kid is my starter every single game. Every single game. He is in my lineup to begin and end the game, period. That's all there is to that. KU gets a huge win over Duke. A game that I don't think anybody thought they were going to win. Again, Norm Roberts, interim head coach. Based off what I saw from KU, if the Jayhawks decide that they are going to stick with Bill Self, after all this all shakes out, which will probably, happen end of the year, I would think they'd have to do something, right? If I'm telling you right now, if you watch that game tonight and you're looking for a head coach, you're ringing Norm Roberts' phone. That's all there is to that. The Brooklyn Nets are the Brooklyn Nets. Weirdest team in the NBA. They are so bizarre, man. And Skip, stop it. Just stop trying to call out Kevin Durant all the time, bro. All right? You've been doing this for how long now? He's not coming on your show. He wouldn't show up to Undisputed with you and Uncle Shay. What makes you think he's going to go on your little show that you've got? Are you serious right now, my man? It's not happening. And if he does do it, he's only doing it to just throttle you, bro. Seriously. All right, everybody. I am Drew Duncan. This is the C57 Sports Show. We are wherever you're listening to podcasts. Simply tell your device to play Drew Duncan, whether it's on iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, etc., wherever you are listening to podcasts. I am there. And as always, stay safe. Take care of yourselves.